Disclaimer: this is audio horror fiction. If darkness or the creatures it holds scares you, leave now. Still listening? Good. Then let's begin. I was 6 when I died. I lived in an old detached house in Surrey. Southwick House it was called. It was a Victorian property. My parents bought it from a very old couple who hadn't lived in it in decades, and as such it had a lot of old furniture they had kept that had been present in the house since it was built. My dad was a leading heart surgeon based out of London, so my parents were pretty wealthy, and our house reflected that. It wasn't a mansion or anything. It was modest compared to other properties in the county, but it was a very nice house. Big gardens, a fountain out back that rose out of an obsidian pond in which my mom kept a few koi. I'd stand there for hours as a kid, just staring into the black mirrored surface, looking for golden glimpses of those marvelous fish. I'd explore the rest of the garden too, endlessly creeping through the flower beds, playing in the woods that bordered the property, summers filled with scraped knees and dirty clothes. Myself and my friends building forts and exploring our own little world. It wasn't the grounds or the pond that killed me, but it was my inquisitiveness. Much like many old English properties of its type, Southwick House had 2 main living floors and an attic. Unlike many English properties, it also had a cellar. Dad used to store wine at the start of the cellar, which was made up of a few roughly hewn rooms that smelled of earth and roots. Beyond his wine rack, however, the cellar was basically unused, except for storing the kind of detritus that a family acquires, never has any need for, but doesn't want to dispose of anyway. I was alone the day that I decided to explore the cellar. It was one of my dad's rare days off, and he and my mom were out in the garden sunning themselves and reading. I came inside to escape the heat, and soon the typical 6-year-old boy boredom kicked in, so I decided to explore the cellar. It wasn't that I was scared of the cellar or anything. I just didn't like the smell, and I kept away from going down there, knowing that the contents were largely boring, and I'd be met with little more than empty rooms. I don't know what possessed me to change my mind that day, but change my mind I did. As I had expected, there was really nothing of interest in the cellar. Even my family's old possessions were just broken bits of furniture and clothes that my older sister had grown out of and my mom hadn't yet donated to Oxfam. I was about to leave the cellar and return to my room and my toys when something on the wall caught my eye. It was a square metal door, too high for me to reach, but to my good fortune a broken chair was nearby. So I dragged it across to this mysterious hatch, climbed up and opened it to see what treasures awaited inside. As you can imagine, it was nothing exciting. It was in fact a fuse box. A very old, very poorly maintained fuse box. A fuse box that I, a curious child, began to meddle with. I don't know what I did exactly. What wire I touched or connection I shorted to cause the jolt of electricity to flow into my body. All I can remember is suddenly feeling a white-hot tingling pain unlike anything I've ever felt before. I felt my body being thrust backwards as if an unseen force had shoved me hard. I felt my spine hit the uneven concrete floor and the breath shoot out of me. Then I felt something I can only describe as a burning hand gripping my heart. That's when I blacked out. I died. I was clinically dead for 20 minutes. The electrocution shorted out my heart, and I lay there actually dead for a few minutes before my dad even found me. He could never explain why he came searching for me that day. All he ever told me was that he knew he had to check on me, and if he hadn't, I don't think I'd be alive today. My dad, the heart surgeon, began attempts to revive me while my mom called the paramedics. After another 15 minutes, which I'm sure must have felt like an eternity for my dad, the paramedics were able to successfully restart my heart. I woke up in a hospital, painful burns covering a large portion of my body. My first thought was fear. that I'd get in trouble for touching the thing in the cellar. And I was scolded, of course, but gently, and alongside gradual explanation of what had happened to me. At 6 years old, I don't think I fully grasped the severity of it, but two things I did understand. One, I was lucky to be alive, and two, I had died and come back. It was a miracle. I had died for 20 minutes, and frankly that made me feel a little bit of a badass. I'd like to say that I have some kind of experience during the 20 minutes I died, but the truth is I didn't. Or if I did, I don't remember it. No light at the end of the tunnel. No out-of-body experience. 1 minute I was dying, and the next minute I was alive again. In time, the whole event became something I told friends as a point of interest. The burns healed, and other than having a regular heart monitoring, life went back to normal. When I was 12, Dad got a job working at a private hospital in the Southwest, and we moved. It was 22 years until I thought about that house again. It was a month after I turned 34. I'd followed my father into medicine and became a GP in Reading, near where I'd grown up as a child. I alternated between running NHS and private clinics. On the day in question, I'd worked particularly late at my NHS practice. When I got home, my girlfriend was waiting with a glass of wine and that look on her face that let me know she had something interesting to tell me. She was practically bursting to speak before I'd even taken my jacket off and loosened my tie. "I got the weirdest call today," Madeline, my girlfriend, said. I kissed her on the cheek and took her proffered glass of wine. "Oh yeah?" "Yeah, some guy in Sussex says family lives in your old house." I frowned. "What, Southwick?" Madeline nodded. I could see she had more to tell. "What did he want?" I asked. "He's been trying to track you down, apparently. Was trying to get a hold of your parents and obviously eventually found you. Both of my parents had died when I was in my 20s. They were old when they had me. Mom died of cancer, and Dad, ironically, of a heart attack. My sister had long since immigrated to Canada, so it made sense that this guy had found me as the next port of call. But why? I asked Madeline as much. "Okay, so this is the interesting part. He wanted to know if anything weird happened to you when you lived at Southwick. Anything supernatural." My eyes widened. It most certainly had not, but my interest was piqued. I was a horror aficionado and a firm atheist, but I guess working as a GP particularly, I had often said I'd love to be proven wrong about the existence of an afterlife. Of course, I expected nothing of the sort from this guy, but I was intrigued nonetheless. I called the number Madeline had taken down. When Giles Robertson answered, his voice gave me pause. The man sounded exhausted, scared even. When I told him who I was, he let out an audible sigh of relief. "I just need to know," he said. "Did you ever have any untoward experiences in the house?" I told him that I hadn't. Nothing even remotely supernatural in feel had happened during my 12 years there. When I finished, Giles Robertson sounded disappointed. "May I ask why?" I inquired. "You're going to think I'm crazy," Robertson said. It was an unusual, candid thing for a stranger to say, especially a man who sounded rather well-to-do. I assured him that, as a doctor, I knew the benefits of listening to and believing people. "We moved in a year ago. It's been happening non-stop ever since. My wife and I, we had never seen anything, never heard anything, but we have 2 kids. Moria, she's 6, and William, he's 8. About a month after we moved in, they started talking about the burning boy, a young boy who had come into their room and well, at first he would play with them. We thought it was an imaginary friend. Siblings can sometimes share imaginary friends. It's not unusual." "Indeed," I said. "I mean, we thought the name, the burning boy, was unusual. But hey, kids have interesting imaginations. So for months everything was fine. We listened to their stories of the boy with polite smiles and nods. But lately, things have escalated. My children keep sleepwalking. We find them in the cellar, standing in front of the old fuse box. When we wake them, they claim to have no memory of how they got there, other than the burning boy led them there. We tried locking the cellar door, but somehow they still get in. I was beginning to feel concerned now. A burning boy, a fuse box. This was horribly personal. Now my wife and I, we can feel them too. The whole house smells of burning flesh and electricity. Just being inside the property makes our skin tingle. There's an inescapable atmosphere. It's like just walking through the door instills an unspeakable terror. And my children, they're afraid of the burning boy now. They say he wants them to do something, but they won't tell us what. We've sealed up the fuse box, but every night now we find them in front of it. And last week, my wife and I woke up down in the cellar with them. We've put the property on the market, but as soon as anyone comes to view it, they leave and never call back. I don't know what to do. I don't want my family to stay here. I'm scared. I was hoping you could help me. But what could I do or say? How would explaining my own childhood electrocution help this man? If what he said was true, and I was haunting the house, what on earth could he do about it? Hell, even I had no idea what it could really be. Nothing about it made sense, or correlate with anything I knew about how ghosts should work. Then I looked at the property listing. I saw how, in their desperation, the Robertson family had listed the house for so much cheaper than the house was worth. And that's how I helped. I bought my childhood home. The chances of this being some weird scam were minimal. The Robertsons stood to lose a few grand on the sale. I even gave them slightly more than the asking price. I could afford it. I guess I felt partly responsible too. And I suppose my skepticism and nostalgia for the old house trumped any concern I had about it being haunted by, what, a specter of my very much living self? I was a fool. I don't know what it is, or how it is, but there's something in this house. I persuaded Madeline to stay back at our apartment while I checked out the house for a few days. I don't know why I wanted to be alone there. I told her it was the memories. I think deep down, I knew there was a reason to be afraid. On the first night, nothing happened. Everything was fine, and the next morning I lamented the Robertsons' loss and celebrated my acquisition of the house I loved so much growing up in. The next night, I awoke in my childhood bedroom to the smell of singed flesh and hair. The atmosphere was electric, tingling through my body as a muggy, oppressive heat caused sweat to form on my brow. I sat up, ambiguously afraid of nothing in particular, until exhaustion took me a few hours later and I drifted back off. On the third night, I saw him. I woke with a jolt, to much the same smell and sensation. Only this time it was considerably stronger, and there, at the foot of my bed, stood the burning boy. It was me. There was no doubt about that. But the burns which covered his body were far worse than I had ever suffered. Smoke drifted from his pallid frame as he watched me with accusing eyes. There's no question that this specter had my face, but he was no ghost. How could he be? I was the man this child had grown up to become, sitting there shivering in bed, a man of flesh and blood and very much living. The burning boy opened his mouth to reveal coal-black teeth and a rotten, stumpy tongue that twitched as he tried to speak. A foul miasma wafted towards me, that of electrical death, years-long decay. I gagged, too frozen with fear to leave my bed, too terrified to approach this phantom with my face. I don't know how long we held that staring contest. I don't know at which point I drifted off to sleep. All I remember is waking up the next morning, my sheets drenched with sweat and a faint smell of electricity searing the air. On the fourth night, I awoke in the cellar. My eyes snapped awake just in time to see my hand reaching out for the fuse box. At some point, the Robertsons had padlocked it, but now the padlock lay unlocked and discarded on the floor. I hadn't even been given the key. I couldn't see the burning boy, but I knew he was there, behind me. I could sense him, smell him, could feel the electrical discharge coming off his terrifyingly tiny form, urging me forward. I could hear him snuffling and snorting. Laughter, I thought. With a cry, I snatched my hand away from that dreaded fuse box, ran upstairs, gathered up some things, and drove to a nearby hotel. The next day, I returned to the apartment I share with Madeline. I gave her some story about how living in the house would be too painful due to the memories of my parents. I'm not sure if she believed me, but bless her, she let it go. I told her I planned to flip the property, knowing I never could. I could never willingly allow anyone, family or not, to be exposed to the burning boy. My plan was to keep the property empty and maybe one day bring myself to have it demolished and sell off the land. My plan isn't going to work. I started seeing the burning boy in my apartment. I started smelling his electric stench. Madeline never saw him, but she could smell him too, although not as strongly as I can. He would stand there in the corner, staring at me as if he wanted something. I suspected I knew what he wanted. It was pretty obvious. And when, one night, I woke up in the cellar of Southwick again, over 2 hours from the bed I'd fallen asleep in, I knew that the burning boy wouldn't stop until he got what he sought. Mercifully, it didn't happen every night. Sometimes I have a week's reprieve, 2 if I'm lucky, but eventually the burning boy returns, and eventually I wake up in the basement with no memory of how I got there, no memory of making the drive across the county. I don't know how to rid myself of him. I can't find a single thing in any paranormal literature that would help me. I can't turn to religion. I doubt he can be exorcised. He's not a ghost. I'm still alive. He shouldn't exist. Did a part of me die and come back? Could I ever have had that kind of malevolence inside me that spawned this thing? I know he wants me to finish the job, to grip the fuse box and let the current take me. And I won't lie, I've thought about doing just that. Every time I wake up in the cellar of that accursed house. But I have a horrible feeling about that too. You see, it clearly wasn't just me that the burning boy wanted. He was after the Robertsons too, after all. And here's the thing. I found out last weekend that the entire Robertson family was killed in their new home. I don't know how they died, not yet. But I do know it was a freak accident. I can hazard a guess at the nature of that accident. And the day they died, it was the day before the burning boy began appearing in my apartment, far from Southwick House. So here's my problem. I think if I ever do reach out for that fuse box and finish what I started when I was 6 years old, I won't be freeing the burning boy. I think I'd be strengthening him. I think I'd be joining him. Thank you all so much for listening. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to leave a like and subscribe and share to help feed the dark machine.